I want to thank everyone for coming here today and participating. The consistency of the participation and the size of the group, I think, is phenomenal. I also want to take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy holiday season and hope each of you have the time to just take a minute with your loved ones and reflect on what we have and just have some happy, joyous times together. A couple things. One is, right now with our budget cycle that we're in with Congress, probably we heard some folks on the radio this morning that we're in a very uncertain time and trying to get an omnibus bill through, which our funding from the Forest Service is dependent on those omnibus bills. It looks unlikely. And so we'll probably be in a series of continuing resolutions. That budget issue affects us in terms of how we go about our business, how we can, spend money on our planning processes. We have already committed money for the science synthesis that you're going to hear today. We're going to see what funds come to help us as we move forward in planning. But I'm real optimistic because we've had the commitments from our Washington office, the priorities that they've placed here in California with our planning efforts, and in large measure, their confidence reflects the perspective they have on the efforts of the Sierra Cascades Dialog and a lot of the other collaborative efforts across California regarding forest management. The other thing I want to talk briefly about is the other day my staff came up and kind of said, Joe, we're kind of tired of operating out of our comfort zone because the pace of what is going on, we're trying things that haven't been tried before. We know some of the processes, many of the processes for planning that we've tried in the past aren't effective. Current forest planning models across the United States are sometimes 5 to 7 years from start to finish, $3.5 to $5 million, and that's not acceptable. And we're trying to look at how we design a process where we can get from the start of a planning process to a record of decision on a forest plan in 3 years for about $1.5 million. And that's about half the time and about a third of the cost. And we obviously are going to have to try things differently. And that's part of the tension and that outside that comfort zone that people are feeling. And we've also had, I know that some of the scientists that you're going to be hearing from today as we look at integrating science into forest planning in a different way and engaging research up front to help us as partners as we move through this, that puts some of them out of their comfort zone. And I know probably a lot of folks here are also, as they, not just engaging in forest plan revision, but when you look at our communities in the Sierra Nevadas, that we have communities that are obviously not in their comfort zone because of the social and economic pressures, the unemployment, and these other services. And I guess my response is I'm okay with people being in their comfort zone when we get these communities back in their comfort zone, when we get these forests and these landscapes back into a resilient state where they're in their comfort zone. And so I don't think any of us can expect to be back in the comfort zone until we see significant progress in those directions and measurable progress. Okay, so I'm going to, I also want to thank Gina and the steering committee for the work they've done in putting these things together. I think we've got a process here that is helping and that is effective. And Gina talked about, well, there aren't any decisions made in these things and the action plans, but I think you can tell that this dialogue is resulting in concrete measures that at least we in the agency and the Forest Service are taking. And the science synthesis, I think, is a very concrete example of an action plan that has been developed as a result of the dialogue's efforts. And I want to thank you for that. Okay, let me push a button and we're just going to see what happens. Okay, so far so good. I'm Joe Stringer. Okay, I'm going to run over these really quick, and it's going to be like a trailer for a movie, because after we break here, I'm going to be out, I think, in the lobby to answer many more specific questions about our process. I also want people to realize that in one sense, we're making this up as we go, and we're asking for you to help us design this process that meets our needs and your needs and the community's needs. And so we don't have a cookbook or a recipe that we're going to be following this. It's kind of, you know, like tossing stuff in and what's going to taste good as we go. But we need bright ideas to help us develop effective processes that are going to meet that 3-year time frame I talked about earlier. So briefly, we'll talk a little about the strategy, what an assessment is, how we integrate the synthesis in that, and the timeline I've kind of laid out in as much detail, you know, as I think I will for now, because if you have more questions, you can ask me later. When we look at the forest planning, and we're going to have a new planning rule in mid-February. 2 years ago, the Forest Service formally kicked off a process to design a new planning rule. Their target date for the final rule was 11/11/11, basically a month ago. And so it's going to be coming out in mid-January with the rule, proposed rule in EIS, with the decision following 3 days later, which is in compliance with the regulations we follow for rulemaking. So, I mean, I look at that as quite a success if you look at the political issues, the amount of public engagement that the Forest Service had in accompanying the promulgation of that rule. They're 2 months late, but yeah, it would have been better at 11/11/11, but that's a pretty good mark on the wall for us to follow as we move into forest plan revision. So, when we talk about a landscape scale, and we're going to hear some of that from the scientists, you know, we're looking across. What are the issues that, you know, transcend individual forest boundaries? We have some of our carnivores. We have, you know, fisher. We have California spotted owl. We have watersheds that span multiple forests. We need to address some of these issues at those scales so we have consistent management across administrative boundaries. We need the forest to help us focus as we get into this planning effort on what are those issues that their constituents, the local communities they serve, what are those issues that are local to those forests. And so it's going to be a merging of this regional approach and the local approach. And that's creating some tension. And I know we're going to have it internally, because I know when I was a deputy forest supervisor, we liked the regional forester to send us money and then leave us alone and let us figure it out. That's not going to happen this time. We're going to have, we're designing our processes differently. We're going to have a contract with Washington office, regional office, and forest on how we're going to go through this process with deliverables. There's going to be accountability built in with the funds that come. And we're going to have to work hard with the forest to understand our different roles in this process. But bottom line is we want forest to provide the substance and the decisions for the plans, and at a regional level we want to help manage that process so we have consistency as we move from forest to forest and revise forest plans. We should be able to look at a forest plan from the INYO and a forest plan from the MoDOT, and they should look different content, but they should look similar. So we just think that level of consistency is going to help us all and also be more efficient as we move through the forest planning process. Basically, these are the kind of standard planning components. This is what we expect to see in the new rule. What do we want out on the landscape? What are those desired conditions? What are the objectives that are going to lead us to meeting those desired conditions? Standards are measurable, basically some kind of a measurable objective or a measurable criteria you can use to help evaluate your performance. One would be you don't put a trail 30 feet from a riparian area, for example. But it has to be measurable, not just repeating the process. There's going to be guidelines, which are similar to standards, but you can deviate from guidelines. And then the suitability of lands. Are there particular landscapes that we need to emphasize certain values, whether it's a recreation opportunity, an environmental opportunity, or commodity opportunity? Okay, so, you know, basically we want, I'm trying to figure out where I am here.
You can triple click and all the bullets will come.
Okay. All right. So for plans,